So where we left off is we were talking about Galileo, and we were talking about how errors were made on both sides, and that's something we should admit. However, you guys should be aware that the fault of the church is greatly overemphasized, and the fault of Galileo is greatly underemphasized in this world. Why? Because people don't like the church. You've probably noticed that by now. They don't like what we stand for. And so any chance to bash it, even with lies, will be seized upon. So in the next few minutes, I'm going to be debunking all the lies so that we can have a truly balanced view. What the Pope said here was kind of true of what Bellarmine did, but it's a little bit exaggerated even because Bellarmine didn't actually believe that literal sense had to be imposed. I mean, Augustine already had come up with a principle that literal sense could be overridden by scientific fact. But what's forgotten is the context. So context is everything. And the context is historical. So you guys need to kind of back up and look at where the Galileo thing happened. It happened shortly after the Protestant revolt. And the Protestants were all about, oh yeah, you Catholics, you don't even read Bibles and you like to keep your people ignorant, and we're all about the Bible. And so what Bellarmine and the church were trying to do is they wanted to be prudent. They wanted Galileo to lay a little bit lower, because the idea of throwing out an interpretation of the Bible for an unproven theory was a bridge too far for the Protestants. And for the church, who was hoping to maybe reunite with the Protestants at that time, they didn't want to risk alienating them by throwing out the literal sense for just a theory. See, the church is completely willing to throw out the literal sense for a proven theory or a law. But back then, heliocentrism was brand new. The church thought heliocentrism was cool. That's why they treated Galileo with such respect before the conflict. But they didn't want it taught as a law because it simply wasn't a law yet. There wasn't enough data. Starting with St. Augustine, the church has always been willing to adjust its interpretation of Scripture's literal sense in light of clear scientific facts. But the church at the time of Galileo did not yet have enough facts to determine this. There weren't enough numbers, there weren't enough years of observation, and they hadn't yet worked out some of the scientific inconsistencies that even then were apparent. That's why Galileo had the wrong idea that the sun was stationary. No one back then really understood yet that the sun also moved and was part of a solar system and the galaxy, and that there were 100 million other galaxies. So people didn't understand that stuff yet. They couldn't. They didn't have the instruments. Oh, by the way, a little fun fact for you. Just in the last month or so, the Webb Space Telescope mirrors are all aligned. So as I told you guys, well, I told this to my physics students a while back when it was launched. I think it was launched in December. It took months, first of all, to cool it down, because it has to cool down like 7 Kelvin, which is really close to absolute zero. And then they had to align the mirrors perfectly. Well, that just happened. So we're going to see views of the cosmos unlike any we've ever seen before in the next few months. But of course, what does it have to do with this? Because they couldn't have known that stuff. They didn't have the capabilities. Galileo erred by stubbornly and defiantly insisting on teaching heliocentrism as a law. This is his problem, okay? He could have avoided the battle. And yeah, the church overreacted. But they overreacted because they were facing the assault of Protestantism. They probably wouldn't have overreacted so much at a different time. Fault on both sides, but the fact is, undeniably, he started the fight. The church didn't start the fight. They treated him very well. He started it. For this reason, he was punished with a very comfortable home imprisonment, which I put in quotes because it's basically a joke. The myth that he was tortured in chains, kept in darkness, is absolute bogus lie, because he had a very nice home imprisonment. He could visit his daughters. He could even keep writing. So this idea that it was the church coming down on science and torturing Galileo is just nothing but black legend. Why do you guys think people believe such things? Two main reasons. What's one of the main reasons that people believe such things? Mr. Tran.
Because it's easier. Because like some lies, it's easier to spread down to the.
Very good. All right. So that's the first of the basic reasons, is that once a lie spreads, no matter how preposterous it is, it's done its damage, and there will be people who believe it, or who've heard from a friend who heard from a friend, and then it becomes fact. Okay, that's one reason. What's another reason?
Because
they want to. They want to believe these lies because lies such as the Galileo myth make the church look bad. And so it provides them a convenient excuse to be against the church. And for the record, Galileo was eventually proven partly wrong. He had posited that the sun was the fixed center of the universe. We know now that it is the center of the solar system, not the universe, and it isn't fixed. See, back then there was no even awareness of other galaxies. Everything to them was the solar system. And then what was beyond it, they just called the fixed stars. They didn't realize that those were other galaxies. As more recent science has shown, both Galileo and his opponents were partly right and partly wrong. Galileo was right in asserting the mobility of the Earth and wrong in asserting the immobility of the sun. His opponents were right in asserting the mobility of the sun and wrong in asserting the immobility of the Earth. So they're both partly right and partly wrong, as you can see. But it couldn't have been otherwise because they didn't have the resources or the capabilities or the understanding yet. So you could say that the whole Galileo thing was just a big, avoidable conflict. And while there was fault on both sides, it could have been avoided because he could have just stood down and not been so stubborn. And in spite of his stubbornness and his sins against the church, he was still treated well with a comfortable home imprisonment that basically didn't curtail his scientific activities at all. Had the Catholic Church rushed to endorse Galileo's views, and there were many in the church who were quite favorable to them, the church would have embraced what modern science has now disproved. So think of it this way, guys. Yeah, you can say, all right, church overreacted, blah, 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 whatever. But if the church had embraced heliocentrism as a law in the way that Galileo was teaching it, they would have been embracing error. And then that would have made them look even worse. Because that would just make them look like the church that, oh yeah, let's just, look at all these new theories and stuff, and let's just adjust our understanding based on whatever is the current understanding of science. Problem is, current understanding of science is often wrong because it needs to get corrected. Mr. Johnson?
So did the church imprison him at his home?
The church subjected him to home imprisonment. Okay, that's very different from the church throwing him into a jail. Okay, but yeah, the church imposed that punishment of home imprisonment.
And I guess they had the right to do that at the time.
They did. And in fact, they had the right to do much worse than that, but chose to be merciful. Okay. So remember, lies get believed for the two reasons we said. A, they're easy to spread and easy to believe. And B, like Catherine said, people want to believe that the church did a lot of bad things. Miss Norton? Yeah. All right, I want to give you a really good handout. All right, the next hot topic, evolution. So you could say that when it comes to the church and science, Galileo and evolution are kind of the two main weapons that anti-Catholics will try to use against us. So we need to talk about evolution and what some of the problems with it are. and also what the church's position on evolution is. Now, it's a pretty complex topic, so there's no way that we could cover it in all its detail, but I am going to give you guys the basics. That should be enough when you get into this discussion with your college roommate. And I keep saying college roommate because it seems to happen. People end up their freshman year, not sophomore and beyond, because then you pick your roommates. Freshman year, you're thrown with a roommate, and they're often going to be people who disagree with you in some way. That's also why most people don't have the same roommate after freshman year. But you could get lucky. All right, so this debate then, you've probably seen this. Has anyone ever seen this on a car? Okay, maybe you haven't, or you've seen the other one, but the idea is that evolution and Christianity are somehow opposed. That's the idea that the secular media wants you to believe. And what we're going to see is that there really is no opposition. You can harmonize them completely, all right? So let's kind of lay out the groundwork. The first is this. Evolution is still a theory. We do not call it the law of evolution, just like we don't refer to the law of relativity. And the reason we can't call relativity a law, just like we can't call evolution a law, is because we can't directly observe it. We can only indirectly observe its effects. So the first thing to clarify then is it is just a theory, but it's not the only theory. There can be other theories. And we as Catholics, by the way, are allowed to hold whatever theory we like. You see, the theory of how something happens is never dogma. Church's dogmas are about what and why and who, but not about how things happen. Even transubstantiation, which is a good theory of how the Eucharist takes place, even that is still a theory, which you're free to accept or reject. Okay, so that's the main point here, Mr. Tran.
Can I hold a theory that microbial bacteria?
Well, there is a problem with that theory, though, because here's the thing. I'm glad you asked the question, Johnny, because some theories of how something happened actually contradict dogma. And here's how that one would. That contradicts dogma because then you're dealing with not people who are capable of accepting or rejecting God, which Genesis 1 clearly tells us.
I do believe that they were capable.
Okay, now that becomes bad science, right? Because bacteria are not capable of such things. And if you claim that they are, then the burden of proof is on you, and it's very hard to prove that bacteria are capable of such behavior. Okay, so it's not really great science. Evolution within species has been demonstrated, between never proven. Can you guys tell me the most famous example of evolution within species that you can probably remember from your biology textbook? Happened in England. The moths. You remember the moths, right? And the moths that change color, and so like when the trees become covered with soot, industrial revolution, natural selection favors the dark moths that are camouflage. Okay, so that's actually commonplace, but the reason we still can't call it a law of evolution is because there's no direct evidence of there ever being a jump from one species to another. Now, I'm not saying that's impossible. It could have happened. I'm just saying why we can't observe it, because it hasn't been observed, at least not yet. The spiritual faculties of the soul, capacity to know, choose, love, sacrifice, cannot be explained through merely biological process. The example I like best for this is that when we talk about natural selection and evolutionary advantage and stuff like that, we're always talking about behaviors that favor a species. But, the young, strong fireman who rushes into the burning building. Everyone's been saved, but there is, one 85-year-old lady there who can't walk. There is no evolutionary advantage for him to go in and save her. In fact, that is evolutionarily risky. And he shouldn't do it. But of course, we all know that he's a hero for doing so. This is all to say that mere biology is not sufficient to explain these faculties. We can't even explain self-consciousness with biology, because self-consciousness is reflection upon oneself, which no mere physical thing can do. The eye can't see itself. It's got to be a mirror, but it can't see itself, whereas we can be conscious of ourselves. Chimps and bonobos share 99% of our DNA, but they don't exhibit spiritual behavior. Now, why is that important? That's important because for us to say that, yeah, chimps are different from us, but our behavior is only 1% different from theirs, is a ludicrous statement. And yet, how can our behavior, which is a quantum leap above theirs, how can that all come down to a 1% difference in DNA? It's not a rational position. Ms. Placencia?
Don't we share like 90% of our DNA?
Yeah, exactly. Right? We share a lot of traits of DNA with many other living creatures. Okay, and that actually lends support to the point, right? You can't use shared DNA to explain or to prove that we're close to animals. All right, the Cambrian explosion. This is perhaps the one obstacle that the theory of evolution still has not been able to surmount. And again, I'm not a theory of evolution basher. It's not my point here. I'm only trying to show you guys that we can't call it a law yet, and that it's not the only way to see things. All right, so let's read. You don't have to write down this long passage, but I want you to understand it. Are we almost out of time? Yeah, we are. All right, guys, so we're going to end it there. So we'll continue this later.